Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to our session today. This is our fourth topic within the series that we've been presenting these last couple of months. This topic is Indigenous Culture, History, and Survival in the 21st Century. For those of you who are just joining us today and haven't had the opportunity to attend any of the previous sessions, this is part of our anti-racism seminar series. These are professional development opportunities that are brought to you by the FCC and District Office Classified Senate, our FCC faculty, and the Student Equity Department, and they are specifically for you as classified professionals. My name is Nylene Clark. I'm part of the Classified Senate. I'm also here with Susie Nitzel, who is the Professional Development Coordinator and our Classified Senate President. Also, Andrea Torres will be joining us. She is also another classified senator. This seminar is on, again, Indigenous Culture, History, and Survival in the 21st Century. It's being presented by Dr. Bernard Navarro. Bernard is a Southern Ute and Henwa, an alumnus of CSU Fresno, and a graduate of University of Oregon, where he earned his MS and PhD in sociology. In 2008, he completed his dissertation titled Southern Ute Language Revitalization, a case study in Indigenous cultural survival and decolonization. Currently, he serves as a tenured professor of sociology at Fresno City College, and he has taught American Indian Studies classes for over 15 years, is an advocate for Indigenous rights, and the courses he teaches regularly include Intro to Sociology, Social Issues, American Pluralism, and American Indian Culture. In this seminar, Bernard will discuss Indigenous culture and history in the United States. The seminar will include a discussion of colonialism and the current decolonization efforts of Indigenous peoples across the Americas. You will learn how racist images and stereotypes of Native Americans have contributed to the marginalization and dehumanization of Indigenous peoples. The seminar will end with a Q&A and some helpful strategies for respecting the incredible cultural diversity of our staff, faculty, and student body. And with that, I will turn it over to Bernard. Oh, Bernard, you're on mute.
How are we doing, everyone? I just want to thank Nylene and Susie and everybody else who helped put this seminar series together. And thank you, Nylene, for that nice introduction. That was a mouthful there. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I'm just gonna jump right into it. And I would like everybody to have something to write with. We're gonna do a free write here. So let's go share screen. Presenter view.
Bernard,
okay. Yes.
we're seeing your notes.
Are you
The
seeing
notes?
Okay.
Yeah, we're seeing the notes version.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know. How's this?
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Excellent. All right. So before I get started on this discussion here, I wanted you guys to take a couple of minutes and just read through this free write here and do your best to answer these questions. So I'll go ahead and read it to you. Move that out of the way. So when you think about American Indians in today's society, what are they like? How do they look? How do they act? Where do they live? Do they have any special rights that non-Indians do not have? If so, what are they? Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. This is just for your private reflection, and then we can talk about this free write towards the end of the discussion. So I'm going to give you at least 2 minutes or so, maybe a little longer. So again, when you think about American Indians in today's society, what are they like? How do they look? How do they act? Where do they live? Do they have any special rights that non-Indians do not have? If so, what are they? Give everybody about another minute. Okay, go ahead and finish up your thought. And so this free write, this little short reflection is for you. Just keep it handy and we'll take a look at this here towards the end of the discussion. All right, so I'm going to start off with some pictures before I get too far into some of the content here. This is a picture of Chief Joseph, and he was a Nez Perce leader. You can see he has an eagle feather attached to his hair. In Native American culture, eagle feathers are very sacred. It's considered to be a religious object. Not just anybody could possess an eagle feather. And you can see he's adorned with some really beautiful beads and a blanket. He's one of my favorite Native Americans in history. Again, Chief Joseph. This is a picture of some Hopi women. The Hopi are from the Southwest, present day Arizona. And you can see that Star Wars, Princess Leia stole her hairstyle from the Hopi. The Hopi culture is, to me, one of the most incredible cultures. A very complex religious structure. They lived and still live in Pueblo communities. Their culture is absolutely beautiful. And they're a sedentary culture. So they lived in permanent settlements, unlike some other Native American groups, which were more nomadic. This is Julian and Maria Martinez. Maria Martinez has passed away, but she's one of the greatest Native American potters. She's really well known for her black on black pottery. It's really, really beautiful. It's my favorite pottery. Native Americans throughout the Southwest, Mesoamerica, invented these really unique styles of pottery, and she's one of our greatest potters. Her work is known throughout North America And if you know anything about pottery, Native Americans, you know about Maria Martinez. Her husband was a potter as well. And so she did most of the pottery, and then he would do the designs. And so they worked together as a team, and they produced some incredible work. And this is Maria preparing Pueblo bread in her outdoor beehive style bread oven. And Pueblo people today actually still make this bread, and they sell it. So if you ever go to the Southwest and you go to a location near a Pueblo community, you might be able to pick yourself up some Pueblo bread. It's actually really, really good. This is Taos Pueblo. It's one of the more well-known towns. It's been in existence for probably at least 1,000 years. And it's one of the oldest pueblos. This is in New Mexico. This picture is from, I believe, the 70s. And you can see the oven, the outdoor bread oven. Native Americans lived in these multi-storied structures in the Southwest and in ancient Mexico as well. And the communities actually still live in these types of structures. In some cases, they've added electricity. Some other pueblos have opted for solar panels, but the style of pueblos have not really changed all that much. It's another picture that I really like. It's this is a Zuni potter, and the Zuni are also Pueblo people. And she's finishing a piece that's yet to be fired. The other two pieces have been fired, and they're completed. And she's sitting on a really beautiful blanket in front of a juniper tree, which are some of my favorite trees. Anyway, I really love that picture. You'll like this one as well. This is Daisy Bead. She was a Cheyenne woman. The Cheyenne were from the Great Plains area. You have Cheyenne people today who live in Oklahoma, in the Dakotas as well. And you can see her double braids. Her dress is made out of probably deer hide, and just really beautiful picture. The Cheyenne people were also called the beautiful people because they were really, really tall and very, very handsome, the men. And even today, if you go to a Cheyenne community, the people are very tall, really, really beautiful people. This is Quanah Parker, another one of my favorite Native Americans. You can see he has his double braids. They're wrapped in fur. And he's actually half white. His mother, Cynthia Parker, was kidnapped by the Comanche. She was later adopted into the tribe. She married one of the leaders, and she gave birth to Quanah Parker, who was a staunch defender of Comanche rights, Comanche territory. Comanche are some of the toughest people. They're often some of the most misunderstood Native Americans as well. But he's one of my favorite Native Americans, and he's one of the first Native Americans that I read about when I was a kid. And I thought it was really interesting that he was half European. You can't really tell in the picture. This is Walking Shooter. He's the one on the left. He's holding on to a fan, an eagle fan, and a pipe. He was Lakota, and for the Lakota, the pipe is actually a sacred religious object. There were ceremonies that involved the use of pipes. You can see he's adorned with eagle feathers in his hair as well. Again, eagle feathers is kind of ubiquitous for all tribes, especially North America. The eagle is a sacred bird pretty much to every single Native American community. And then you see Sitting Bull, and you may have heard of Sitting Bull. He is another one of my favorite Native Americans. And he's just really cool, a very handsome man. He has double braids as well. It's a very common hairstyle, is the double braids. And he has 2 eagle feathers as well that he's adorned with. Very well-known Native American. And this is Maddie Tom. She's Chiricahua Apache. And I'm sure people have heard of the Apache. I love Apache people. They're some of my favorite Native Americans. I usually go to San Carlos Apache Reservation at least once a year. I have friends who live out there, and they're some of the most beautiful people in the world. They just have just an incredible look to them. And I love this picture of her. And these are some of my ancestors right here. And you can see these are Ute families. You can see the cradle boards that these 2 cute little Native American children are wrapped up in. You can always tell it's a Native American baby if the child has a lot of hair and a really fat, round face. It's a tell. But I absolutely love this picture right here. It just really embodies what Native American culture is all about. It's all about the family. And you can see Native families still use these cradle boards today. This is a picture of John Trudell and his wife. John Trudell is a very famous Native American actor and activist as well. He was a spokesperson for the American Indian movement, and he just died a couple of years ago, passed away of cancer. All right, let's see here. This is Manuelito. He was a Dene, also known as Navajo. And he, again, very interesting. I love his looks. When I look at him, just looks like a very fierce person. He was a war leader. He fought the United States and defended his homeland. Eventually, the Dene were defeated by the US. But the Dene have a very interesting culture. They have a blend of obviously indigenous culture, but they adopted many of the Spanish commodities that were brought to the Southwest. For example, they herd sheep. They started using sheep wool. And they also adopted aspects of Western culture as well. All right, this is Frank Juan. Frank is a Native American rapper and activist. He was here at Fresno City College back in 2018. And I just wanted to show kind of a more modern picture. And he's a Native American leader. I have a lot of respect for him. He came here to a youth summit, a Native American youth summit that we put on back in 2018. And he's just an inspiration to Native American kids. These are the Shoni, or these are the Schimmel sisters. They're Umatilla, and just really great role models, played basketball for Louisville. The oldest sister went on to be drafted in the WNBA, and they've been here to Fresno quite a few times, so they have a relationship with some of the local tribal communities. This is Navajo fry bread. If you haven't had fry bread, go to a powwow, which is basically a Native American social gathering, and buy some fry bread. It's really good. The only thing I always tell people that this is not necessarily traditional Native American food. It's kind of, I guess, colonial food, if you will. Native Americans were forced onto Indian reservations and basically were given commodities like sugar and flour and wheat. And so the Native Americans were being forced to give up their traditional foods, and they adopted these colonial foods. They're not very healthy. Unfortunately, fry bread tastes really good, but it's not really good for us. But I always encourage people, if you've never had fry bread, definitely try it. It's really, really good, especially Navajo fry. I don't know what the Navajo do with the fry bread, but it's outstanding. This is Vanessa Jennings. She's a Kiowa artist, and you can see the dress here that she created. It's a battle dress. So the Kiowa back in pre-colonial times, it wasn't seen as a positive thing for a man to talk about his military exploits. So if he was bragging about what he did in battle, it was kind of seen as being egotistical, but his wife could brag about his military exploits. And often she would display his military achievements in her dresses that she would make. And this dress right here is in honor of her grandfather, who I believe was a World War II veteran. And this picture is, I can't think of their names right now, but they're lacrosse players. The important thing to remember is lacrosse is a Native American game, and Native Americans still play this game. Native Americans influenced American athletics quite a bit. You know, sports like hockey, lacrosse, even American style football have their roots in Native American athletics. All right, so we're looking at a map here of North America, and it's broken down into culture regions or culture areas. And the way I like to explain this map, well, first of all, not all the tribes are on this map. What I always tell people, when you think about Native Americans, we need to think about the incredible diversity that exists between tribes. All tribes are unique in their own way. Some tribes spoke a very similar language, but in some cases, a tribe that would be located to another community might speak a language that was mutually unintelligible. And so there's a lot of different languages that are spoken throughout North America. Customs are incredibly diverse. Religious beliefs are diverse. Ceremonies, songs, you name it. You might find some commonalities between tribes that live in a certain area. For example, tribes of the Great Plains may be very similar, but that's not always the case, because some tribes of the Great Plains were hunter-gatherers, and other tribes like the Hidatsa and the Mandan were farmers. The Southwest, the Hopi, the Zuni were very similar, but then the Apache, the Utes, their culture was very different than the Hopi and Zuni, and they occupied a very similar territory. So I like to start off all my lectures whenever I teach a class on Native American issues or Native American culture, Native American history, with discussion of our local tribes. And so I always remind people that Fresno and Clovis does sit on Native land. In a moral and an ethical sense, this is still Yokuts land, still Mono territories. And so these are the two Native American groups that occupied this land that we live on, that Fresno City College sits on. We have a place on campus at Fresno City College. It's called Yokuts Plaza, and it's dedicated to the Yokuts and the Mono people. They are very unique in different communities, but there's been a lot of intermarriage. So if you meet somebody who's Mono, they probably have Yokuts relatives, and vice versa. The Mono people occupied mostly the foothill area. They spoke Uto-Aztecan language, and the Yokuts occupied mostly the lower foothill area in the San Joaquin Valley. And at one time, there were probably over 50 different Yokuts communities. They were very small communities, but they were all connected through culture and through language. And the same goes for the Mono people as well. Reservations and rancherias, we do have, well, first of all, let me explain what a reservation is. A reservation basically is a designated Native American territory. So as Westerners are basically stealing Native American land and occupying Native territories, indigenous people are being forced into what I would call a concentration camp, right? And later these concentration camps are called reservations. And they were really places where they sent Native Americans to die because they were underserved in these locations, underfed, very little medical care and so forth. And so these reservations weren't really the best places. And today these places are now our homes. And we've made the best out of the situation. In some cases, these reservations are really thriving, but back during the colonization period, reservations were not wonderful places. And in some cases, they're still not all that wonderful. A rancheria is basically a reservation. They're typically smaller than some reservations. Here in California, the closest reservation to us would be the Tule River Indian Reservation, which is located outside of Porterville. But you have Table Mountain Rancheria, which is about 20 minutes from where I'm at right now. You have Cold Springs, which is near Toll House. You have Santa Rosa Rancheria, which is near Lemoore. Big Sandy Rancheria, it's located above Auberry. Picayune Rancheria, which is off of 41. And then again, I said Tule's outside of Porterville. And Jackson Rancheria, which is located up near Sonora. So if there's one thing I would hope that you would remember is the names of these people. Again, this is important to me, to always honor the Yokuts people and to honor the Mono people. We're on their land. They were the caretakers of this land for, who knows, 10,000 years before the rest of us arrived. And, you know, I saw a documentary on Fresno one time, and the historian talked about how, you know, God had created this beautiful valley here. And the first thing that came to mind was that, you know, God didn't create the valley. It was the Yokuts and the Mono people who created this valley, because they nurtured the landscape and they made it this incredible place that it is, in terms of it being such a fertile land. And I know at times it can get kind of ugly here with smog and pollution, but they had really nurtured the landscape, and it was really an oasis prior to the arrival of Europeans. So we should be thankful to them and to their descendants who are still here today. Terminology, I did get a question about terminology, and I wanted to touch on that. I don't have a problem with the term Indian. I grew up using that term. People in my family still use that term. We call ourselves Indians, but there are some people, mostly the younger generation, who don't like the term Indian. I would say the safest term you could use would be Native American. Even American Indian is a little controversial as well. I use the term indigenous people. I actually use all these terms. I use them interchangeably. It just depends, I guess, on my mood of the day. You know, but most of the time I would say I'm indigenous, but I do find myself saying I'm Indian when I reflect on it. But when people ask me, well, what term is appropriate? I just tell people, you know, call individuals what they want to be called. So if you ask somebody, are you offended by the term Indian? And they say yes, well, then don't use it. And the safest term that you could probably use would be indigenous or Native American. But our program here is called American Indian Studies, and it was created by, you know, people who came out of the American Indian movement. And so, again, that's a term that some might view as being a little outdated. I don't see it that way. Maybe I'm outdated. So, but if I told my mother, you're indigenous, she wouldn't even know what that meant. She would call herself an Indian. First Nations is a term that is used mostly in Canada. You'll find some people use that term here in the United States, but that's usually a term that I see more among Canadian Indians. See there, I just used the term Indian. I would say when you're talking about a specific tribe, don't say the Indians, or don't even say Native Americans, use their tribal name. If you know the name, say Lakota. If it's the Lakota you're referring to, say Lakota. If it's the Chippewa or it's the Ute, say the Ute. So use the tribal names when possible. So when I'm talking about Mono people, I say the Mono, or if I'm talking about the Yokuts, I say the Yokuts. If I'm talking about Native Americans in general, I'll say Native Americans or indigenous peoples. All right, so this is where it can get a little controversial, talking about pre-invasion indigenous culture. Should probably be cultures, because there's literally hundreds of different cultures. Some people refer to this as pre-Columbian culture. I call it pre-invasion because really what happened after 1492 was an invasion, and I'll kind of get to that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about prior to 1492, because that's really the good stuff. After 1492, the history of Native Americans gets really, really ugly. So this is really the good stuff that I love to present. I often hit my students with the good stuff, and then I hit them hard with the history, and I'm hoping to do that here in the next couple of slides. So Native Americans arrived here in the Americas, who knows when? 10, 15, 25,000 years ago. I really don't know. I do believe in the out of Africa theory. I think all human beings, we all started out in Africa and we all left Africa. I have been told by some professors that we're immigrants just like everybody else, and I beg to differ. I've never felt comfortable with that. There's a big difference between living here for, again, thousands of years than jumping off the boat, say 500 years ago. So I'm not really all that concerned with when we arrived in the Americas. All I know, in 1492, we were firmly established here in the Americas. There is some archaeological evidence that argues that we arrived at the tip of South America by 8000 BC. Again, Native Americans were speaking literally hundreds of different languages, practicing different religious customs. The cultural diversity is just absolutely incredible. Additionally, Native Americans began to settle down in permanent settlements, probably around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, maybe longer. We really don't know. And we start to develop crops like corn, amaranth. Corn, squash, and beans are like the main three, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. But there's literally just hundreds of different foods that Native Americans develop. Different species of cotton, tobacco, sweet potatoes, chili peppers, beans, and so on. It really is incredible, the contributions to culinary arts on behalf of indigenous people. Absolutely amazing. They're your premier plant breeders. And this goes completely ignored by most people who teach Native American history or Native American culture. There were also really well-developed major civilizations like the Incas, the Aztecs, and the Mayans, and the Olmecs. I don't tend to prop these civilizations up. I don't put them on a pedestal and say, well, look what these incredible civilizations accomplished, because to me, these civilizations are no better than, say, a smaller hunter-gatherer society that was living off the land in really small, not maybe migratory or maybe even non-migratory communities. But they were incredible in some of their accomplishments. The ones that are most impressive to me are the ones that you see in ancient Mexico. I mean, they're definitely incredible civilizations. They built stone-carved cities. They studied mathematics, astronomy. Their agricultural inventions were, pretty incredible. Corn is like the one food that we most of us know about, Indian corn. But even corn, is just an absolutely incredible invention. It's a human invention. It might be one of the greatest human inventions, and it probably took maybe a few thousand years to perfect. Um, but there's a saying, that where corn went, civilization followed. Corn allowed people to become more sedentary, become more non-migratory, and the development of corn is just an absolutely incredible story. Economics, again, you have some tribes that were hunters and gatherers or foragers. My people were hunters and gatherers, very simplistic lifestyle. People assume that because our lifestyle was simplistic, that we were simple-minded. But I would argue that our cosmology was very complex. We had a very complex view of the universe, a very complex view of nature. And just because we had very simple technology didn't mean that we didn't have a very deep, deep understanding of the environment. And then you had your agricultural tribes, the ones that settled down and started harvesting or growing and harvesting corn, squash, and beans, and so many different other foods that I'll mention a little later. Again, you have your major civilizations, you have your ancient mound builders, your Aztecs, your Mayans, the Olmecs, Zapotecs. And we're just now even still beginning to understand just how incredible these civilizations were. Political organizations, I mean, Native Americans were mostly built around a clan system. And so when you were born into a tribe, you knew exactly what clan you belonged to. It was typically your mother's clan. Kinship relationships were typically matrilineal. There were some tribes that were patriarchal or patrilineal. But when you were born into a community, you typically belonged to your mother and to your mother's tribe, your mother's community, your mother's clan. That was your identity. And when you married, most tribes were matrilocal. So if you married, and let's just say you're a little boy, you grow up to be a young man and you're raised in your mother's community, you would marry outside of your community typically. And when the ceremony was over, you would go and live with your wife's family. So you would live with your in-laws if you were male. If you were female, you would stay with your family from birth all the way up until your death. In most Native American communities, it's not always the case. So these matriarchal clan structures are really really misunderstood by Westerners because Europeans were coming out of a patriarchal type of system. I would even argue is a toxic patriarchal system that arrives here in 1492. And they didn't really recognize the fact that women held these positions of power, that women were really respected. And it's the unfortunate aspect of colonialism really has been the negating of the power of Indigenous women. And I would say that even today, even though colonization has certainly done a lot of damage to our cultures, that Indigenous women are still very, very powerful. They hold a lot of authority in our communities, even today. And I would say there's typically in every family, there's a female matriarch. She kind of runs the show. That was really never acknowledged by Europeans, partly because of its patriarchal structures. And the Iroquois are probably one of the better known examples of where Indigenous women had a lot of power and say. So in North America, Europeans, again, they failed to recognize the respect and power accorded to women of the Iroquois and a number of other Indigenous peoples. So religion, I'm just going to go ahead and put all of this up. We'll go through each bullet point. So there's an incredible diversity, like I said. You can't look at one tribe and say, well, this one tribe does things this way, and so all the other tribes believe this as well. So Native American religious beliefs and practices display incredible diversity. And what one tribe does to honor the ancestors, to pay their respect to the earth, may be different than another tribe. I would say there are some commonalities. The commonality would be is that there's this deep respect for the land, deep respect for the earth. We don't pray to the earth, right? Often we pray to the creator to give us guidance so that we don't do harm to other life forms. Or we may have developed a certain sacred covenant with a particular plant or a number of plants, like the corn, the squash, and the beans are often referred to as the three sisters. And so the corn, squash, and beans are venerated plants. And so we honor and respect the plants, and we sing to the plants. When we hold harvesting ceremonies to honor the different plants that we have these sacred covenants for. Same goes for certain animals that we hunt, like the bison or the deer or salmon. There would be ceremonies that would be performed to honor the salmon, to honor the bison. Shrines or temples can be found throughout Mesoamerica. Native Americans really have shrines all over the Americas. In some cases, they're unknown to outsiders because they wouldn't know what to look for. There's been a lot of shrines that have been destroyed because in many cases, these locations aren't meant for outsiders to really know anything about. And so, especially like in the Southwest, many of your Pueblo communities have had to sit and watch as developers have exploited territories that are sacred to their culture. Let's see here, bullet point 3, religious and spiritual leaders are found in all communities. In some cases, tribes have religious orders and they train people to become healers. Again, Native Americans were deeply religious, deeply spiritual, like all ancient cultures. But a lot of diversity in the way that they practice their spirituality. But there was a interesting entanglement of spiritualism and science. There really wasn't a separation of the two. Like in our society, we tend to separate science and religion. Native Americans didn't have a separation. So if somebody broke their arm, they had somebody in the community who was a spiritual healer, or just a healer who would set the arm, right? Who could heal the arm by setting it. But then you might have another spiritual healer who would come along and pray for that person. So that way, if there was some type of psychic harm done to them, some type of psychic trauma, they would heal that as well. And so Native Americans had pharmaceuticals and the stereotype is that Native Americans, we healed through using some type of connection that we had with the creator. And I think that's just mostly just that, a stereotype. Native Americans certainly prayed for people who were sick, but we had people who also understood pharmaceuticals, understood antibiotics and antivirals, and knew how to use what we would call modern medicine to heal people. So there was like this symbiotic relationship between science and spirituality that Native Americans, I think, were able to create these amazing systems of healing. And these are still practiced even today. Even with COVID, I talked to a lot of Native Americans who used traditional medicines and also used spirituality as well to be able to stave off COVID. Most Native Americans believe that in the universe there exists a spiritual force that binds us all together. It's the source of all life. The sun is often viewed as a manifestation of spiritual power in the universe. There is this concept of power that I think is really interesting as well. There's this belief that we all possess some type of spiritual power. And you think about it, like all of you who are listening to this discussion, many of you hold incredible power. You're professors, you work with people. The things that you say to others have incredible influence. In other words, you have power. You have the power to make somebody stay, and you have the power to do harm to somebody as well because of your positions. Sometimes your power is gifted to you because of hard work. You had to put in a lot of hard work, like going to school to acquire certain knowledge, or sometimes you're really good at music. You're just natural at playing the guitar or natural at whatever it is that you do. And so there's this belief that all of us have some type of spiritual power, and we all have something to give to our communities, to our society. Now, we could use our power for good, and we can use our power for bad. It's up to you. Sacred places, there is this belief that the land is sacred, yes, but there are certain places that have maybe a little more power. It may be a place where something important happened. And there are sacred places all over the Americas. These places have maybe some type of healing quality as well. And in my homeland, we have certain sacred places that we visit where we hold ceremonies, where we go to heal if you're not well. And unfortunately, because of colonialism, because of capitalism, our places have been damaged and have been exploited. And there is this struggle today to protect our sacred places. Ceremonies, again, are practiced by all tribes. These ceremonies celebrate, honor the cycles of nature, the planting and harvesting of crops. We have rites of passages and so on. We have a ceremony for just about everything. Before we would harvest certain foods, before we would harvest strawberries, it would probably be like a strawberry festival, maple festivals for the harvesting of maple, ceremonies to honor the corn, squash, and beans. Again, I'm going to go through this real quickly here. I have some great resources for you, but these are just other contributions I want to mention real quick. Again, political philosophy. There's some people who believe that Native Americans, I believe this, not that we created American-style democracy, but that we influenced our founding fathers in the creation of American-style democracy. So I think that our founding fathers were influenced quite a bit by the Iroquois people, by the Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse. There's a lot of strong evidence that suggests that. So when I teach this to my students, I don't tell them that we created democracy. I tell them that we contributed to the creation of American-style democracy. Military strategies. You have great warriors like Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull, Geronimo, Osceola, Tecumseh. Again, these were just natural warriors. They were always undermanned, but very, very successful in battle. Some Native American communities have public education, like your Aztec, your Mexica communities had a form of public education, as did the Cherokee. The Cherokee had a public education system within the borders of the United States before we had a public education system. Engineering, bridge building, road construction, apartment style living, city planning, the construction of canals, fishing strategies, medicine, the use of fire, environmental management. We didn't have horses prior to the arrival of Europeans, but when horses come here, we adopt horses, and Native Americans create horse breeds like the Appaloosa, the Pinto, the Comanche created some really incredible horse breeds. When the Comanche would encounter the U.S. Army discussed why are their horses so fast? Why do their horses why are they able to endure so much, and why do our horses wear out? Well, the Comanche, what they were doing is they were selectively breeding horses for speed and for power, and so they were superior equestrians, along with a lot of other tribes as well. My people are also very adept at breeding horses. Athletics, I've mentioned. The Thompson brothers, those are the lacrosse players, and they're just incredible young athletes. But lacrosse, referred to as the creator's game, hockey, American style football, I would even say basketball have its roots in Native American athletics. In 1987, the United States Senate passed a resolution acknowledging a historical debt owed to the Iroquois. Again, you can look that up. Again, corn, squash, and beans. These are referred to as the Three Sisters. Again, just real quick, just so many different foods, like over 50% of the foods that we eat today, and 3/5 of all cultivated crops come from Native Americans. Everything from potatoes and sunflowers and chocolate, peanuts, a variety of nuts and seeds, tomatoes, avocados, chilies. Tobacco was domesticated by Native Americans, some species of cotton. There were over 3,000 different varieties of potatoes that were invented by Native Americans. Dozens and dozens of different types of corn, maple syrup, the freeze drying of potatoes and making meat jerky were Native American inventions. Chocolate, vanilla, these are all Native American inventions. I mean, imagine the culinary arts without tomatoes, without chilies and avocados, or imagine baking without vanilla. Or imagine life without chocolate. Different types of beans. Native Americans prized plant diversity. And so not only did they create just a couple of different types of varieties of beans or corn or squash, they created literally dozens. This is the history, and this is where it gets ugly, right? The conquest and genocide of Native Americans. It's a very sad story. It's one of the, I guess, ugliest stories of America. It's one of the stories that isn't told very often in our history books. And I'd just like to say that some of the stuff I'm going to share is definitely not very pretty. Indian massacres and violence against Indians was commonplace from the beginning of the conquest, starting in 1492. The theft of Indian lands was commonplace. That's how we created the United States of America, first by stealing Indian land. The rape, the sexual assault, and murder of indigenous women was commonplace starting in 1492, and that continues even today. And I'm going to discuss that here in a second. The mutilation of Indian bodies was very, very commonplace. After battles were fought, often soldiers would mutilate the dead bodies of Native Americans and take home war trophies. There's a lot of history of this. There's a book that I recommend. I read this back in the 90s. It's titled American Holocaust, and it's just an incredible story of genocide that he tells from the beginning all the way up until about the 1990s. And it's really, this history is ugly. And I would say that every single tribe was put through a meat grinder at some point in time, some starting in 1492, others starting a little later, when it depends on their encounter with Europeans. I had a student one time ask me, well, you know, when you talk about the history of Native Americans, you only talk about the bad stuff. And what I say is, well, you tell me the good and we'll talk about it, right? There isn't a lot, there just isn't. Now there's stories of Native American resilience, there's stories of Native American resistance, and those are incredible stories, but the end is pretty much always the same, right? A lot of death and destruction of Indian cultures, destruction of the land, and the assault and rape of indigenous women. You know, we celebrate the building of California missions in our education system, but David Stannard, he describes the California missions as these furnaces of death, where Native people are basically being brought to these missions to work the missions and are dying by the thousands. The California Gold Rush, what I think about, I guess, one of the most easily provable cases of genocide against indigenous people, I think of the Gold Rush and the theft of indigenous territories here in California, the sexual assault of Native women, the sex trafficking of Native American women. The Gold Rush resulted in the death of about 90% of Native Americans here in California. You have the Indian Removal Act, which was basically equivalent to ethnic cleansing. You have the boarding school system, which I'm going to talk about here in a second. You have the civilization regulations. We always pride ourselves on democracy and freedom, but Native Americans were not given the freedom to practice their religion after they were forced onto Indian reservations. You had the civilization regulations, which basically outlawed Native American religious practices. And these laws were kept in place for decades. The idea was to completely stamp out and destroy Native American religion. There was this view that Indians were too communal, too family oriented, and that their religion taught them to share, taught them to care for others. And there was this effort, this mass effort to destroy that aspect of Native culture. Kill the Indian, save the man. This is a brief history of the boarding school system. Carlisle is the first off-reservation boarding school. It was created by Colonel Henry Pratt. This is a statement by Henry Pratt. It says, transfer the savage-born infant to the surroundings of civilization. He will grow to possess a civilized language and habit. So just read it one more time. Transfer the savage-born infant to the surroundings of civilization. He will grow to possess a civilized language and habit. And again, the idea was kill the Indian, kill the culture, basically. More than there is a case of 19 Hopi men who were imprisoned at Alcatraz, some of the first prisoners at Alcatraz to send their, because they refused to send their kids to boarding schools. So again, conditions in these schools were terrible. We're talking about loss of family, culture, religion, and language. Basically, it was like being in a prison. And so there were all kinds of abuses, everything from, cutting off their hair, forcing them to wear military style clothing, leasing them out as domestic laborers, forcing them to work basically as a slave labor type of population, slave labor population.
I'm sorry, Bernard, can I just interrupt you for a minute? Your internet froze up a little bit when you were on the previous slide. So the lead into the schools we kind of missed.
Is it this slide right here?
Yeah, I think you're about halfway through it and you froze up.
All right, we ready?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right, so I'll just go ahead and start over. So kill the Indian, save the man. That was the mantra regarding Native Americans after they're forced onto reservations. In other words, kill the culture. Again, over 100,000 Native Americans were forced into these boarding schools. I have family members that were forced into boarding schools. When I worked on my dissertation, I interviewed a lot of people who attended Native American boarding schools. They started in the late 1800s and they went on all the way until the 1980s. So we have a lot of people who are alive today who attended these schools. And again, the schools were not really friendly places for Native Americans. We're talking about loss of family, culture, religion, language, basically like being in a prison. They were military-like conditions, forced assimilation, forced to adopt English, forced to give up your religion, forced to convert to Christianity. They were often leased out. These kids were leased out as laborers to farmers to pay for the schools. There was widespread sexual and physical abuse. I interviewed a lot of survivors of the boarding school system, and they were very candid about the physical abuse and the sexual abuse that they knew that was going on in these schools. Punishment for speaking their own language. There's a quote right here. says, I was forced to eat an entire bar of soap for speaking my language. This is Byron Wesley, who is a Navajo. It says right here, first they took our land, then they took our children. This is kind of a before and after picture. These pictures were taken basically to promote the boarding school system as a success. Like, look, we took the savage and turned this savage into something that is more civilized. And it's basically, some people call it cultural genocide. It's not cultural genocide, it's just genocide is what it is. And again, it's one of the best kept secrets in American history is the boarding school system. All right, contemporary life. So there's over 500 federally recognized tribes in the United States. That is 500 tribes that are recognized by the federal government. There's probably another 200 tribes that don't have federal acknowledgement. I don't want to get too much into that, but basically if you have federal acknowledgement, you are afforded more resources than tribes that don't have federal acknowledgement. And there's probably today over 570. I think the last time I checked was like 565, but somebody was telling me that a few more. Some do.
Sorry, Bernard, I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but you kind of cut out again, maybe about halfway through this slide.
This one right here?
Yeah.
Okay. No worries. So there's over 500 federally recognized tribes, over 300 Indian reservations. Again, tribes run and own their own businesses. You're probably familiar with the casino industry. One important point I try to make is that the vast majority of Native Americans do not benefit from casino money. We have a wide variety of social problems, just like all societies do: drug and alcohol abuse, various health issues, obesity, heart disease, diabetes, and so on. Loss of language and cultural traditions. We have the highest suicide rates among any ethnic group. We have issues related to gang activity and crime. Some of the bad, let's talk about some of the good. I mean, tribes are working to strengthen their governments. They're working to assert their sovereign status. They're diversifying their economic activities, crafting social policies that reflect their culture. They're reworking their constitutions. They're decolonizing. They're nation building. They're working to protect what is left, whether it be their homelands, their resources, their cultural traditions, their languages, and so forth. On some reservations, they have their own schools, hospitals, gyms, museums, their own fairs, their own events. Many of these events are open to the public. Again, tribes are working to protect their citizens' birthright through taking control of what resources are left, through exercising their sovereign rights. So again, what powers do Native Americans have on their reservations? Again, they have a semi-sovereign status. They're not fully sovereign, but they get to determine their own form of government. They define requirements for tribal citizenship. The federal government cannot force a tribe to give somebody citizenship. They administer justice and enforce their laws. They can tax tribal members. They regulate domestic relations of their members and regulate property use as well. And these are just a few of the powers that they have. You have the Bureau of Indian Affairs. This is the federal agency that is supposed to work with Native Americans. So there's a trust relationship, And the Bureau of Indian Affairs, often called the BIA, or bossing Indians around, is what some people refer to the BIA as. But they oversee, again, reservation land use, leasing of mineral rights, developing of forest lands, developing and directing agricultural programs, protecting water and land rights. This is the way I describe it. It's like the fox guarding the hen house, right? The BIA and Native American relationship has always been very contentious. It's been a rough one. Stereotypes of Native Americans. There's 4 that I have identified that I like to teach to people. Number 1, the noble savage, right? We're this romantic image to many people today. They think of the film like Dances with Wolves, right? The proud Indian who is in touch with Mother Earth. Or you have just the savage. That's the other, I guess, the opposite of that, is that we're savages, we're uncivilized. You have the vanishing race stereotype, that we're on our way to extinction. We can't compete in Western society, or that we're living fossils, that our culture is trapped in the past. And again, these are all stereotypical views of Native Americans. And I argue that stereotyping is a form of dehumanization. It was done throughout the conquest and invasion of Americas, basically to disenfranchise us, to push us to the margins, to create this idea that our culture was backwards, uncivilized, that we were savage-like creatures or monsters. Rick Santorum recently said in a he's a CNN, I don't know what they would, analyst or whatever. Anyway, he's a former politician, and he recently said in a talk that, well, Europeans come to the Americas and there's nothing here. Well, yes, there's Native Americans here, but they didn't do anything while they were here. That's the stereotype. Again, these are really ugly views of indigenous people that most Americans have of Native Americans, because they just don't know. And unfortunately, these stereotypical views are perpetuated in really all facets of mainstream American culture, in media, and on TV, popular culture, print, I mean, you name it. Other common stereotypes: Native Americans are warlike, they all lived in teepees, smoked peace pipes, worship nature, we lack a sense of humor, we're uneducated, alcoholics, drug abusers, sexually deviant. Again, these stereotypes, the aim is to take away our humanity. When you take away somebody's humanity, it's easy to ignore their issues. And this is why I'm so against mascots. Any type of image that gives a stereotypical view, I'm typically against. Here are some common stereotypical expressions: sit like Indians, you act like a bunch of wild Indians, you're an Indian giver, too many chiefs, not enough Indians, the only good Indian is a dead Indian, drunken Indian, Indian burn. These are all things I've heard in my lifetime. So why are stereotypes of Native Americans harmful? Well, they dehumanize us, number 1. They distort children's perceptions of Native Americans. They devalue our sacred objects, our art, our cultural traditions. They keep our culture kind of trapped in the past. And they do harm to our children, to Native American children, who often feel ashamed of who they are. I grew up feeling ashamed of who I was, partly because of what I learned in school, because of the stereotypes I was taught, that I was fed constantly. And one of the reasons why I'm so against any type of stereotyping of indigenous people is I want my kids to grow up to be proud of who they are, to feel comfortable in their own skin. This is our land. Our ancestors have been here longer than anybody else, and our cultures were incredible and beautiful and still are. And this is what I want all Native children to believe about themselves. And so I am against Native American mascots. This is an image that I show to people. The Cleveland Indians logo is one that is used. Imagine, let's replace that with the other logos here, and you can imagine, right, the pushback. The Fresno High Warriors, that mascot was changed recently. But I talked to the people who worked on that project to get rid of that mascot, to get rid of the logo, and they received death threats, and they received all kinds of racial hatred in return. And this was, again, something that was done recently. I have a quick video. Let me look at my time, see what I have here. I want to show this video. It's about 2 minutes long, and then it'll kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about here.
Proud, forgotten, Indian, Navajo, Blackfoot, Inuit, and Sioux, survivor, spiritualist, patriot, Sitting Bull, Hiawatha, and Jim Thorpe, mother, father, son, daughter, chief, Apache, Pueblo, Choctaw, Chippewa, and Crow, underserved, struggling, resilient, Squanto, Red Cloud, Tecumseh, and Crazy Horse, rancher, unyielding, strong, indomitable. Native Americans call themselves many things. The one thing they don't.
So I was really happy to see that the Washington football team, after all those years of using that abhorrent depiction, finally did away with it and that horrible name. I wish I had a little bit more time to get into the name, that term, but I was just really happy to see that that was eventually done away with. The next contemporary issue I want to deal with, besides the mascot issue and the stereotyping, is the missing and murdered Indigenous women's issue. And this is kind of how I'm going to kind of close up this discussion here. And I'm going to have you watch this. It's very brief. And then I'll talk a little bit about this issue. Again, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. This is one of the most important issues that we talk about today in Indian country.
3.5-hour drive north of Standing Rock has been heavily fracked over the last decade.
And are you the only guy in this youth group?
No, there's another one. He couldn't come.
So there's how many boys?
There's 3.
3?
Yeah.
Why do you think it's young women stepping up into this fight?
When I was younger, and I remember it like changing because of the oil coming in, and like you like going to Newtown and you could just see like wells, oil wells everywhere you look. Like a long time ago, it wasn't like that. Like it's just basically destroying our land up there, and like our tribal leaders don't really care because all they see is the money and everything. It's really taken over our people. We don't feel safe in our own communities anymore because of all the men that the oil brought in, because like the economy and the jobs and everything.
You can get just picked up off of the sidewalk or wherever you are. Someone can just steal you.
You can just get stolen, and what happens to you?
You can get raped, you can get killed or sold.
Yeah, multiple times.
Sold to who?
Different men.
The oil boom in North Dakota has brought an influx of money to the region, but with it has come drugs, crime, and sex trafficking. In the community of Fort Berthold, there has been a 168% increase in violent assaults against women. Man camps, the temporary lodging set up to house oil workers, has put women's lives at risk, and tribal police officers can do little to stop it. The United States Supreme Court stripped tribes of the right to arrest non-natives who commit crimes on reservation land, sending a strong message that on Indian land, criminals can get away with almost anything.
It's scary to think that you guys are scared to walk out your own doors. It's scary to think that that could become what our community is like. I refuse to let that happen to me or like any of us, you know what I mean? Like anybody in our community. That's why I'm like doing this. That's why I'm standing up. But I want to use my voice because it can't continue to go on how it is going up there. So. Oh yeah, ma kiayo, chema kiayo.
This is a podcast. It's called All My Relations Podcast, and it really gets into the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And it's embedded in the PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to make sure that I make this available to everybody.
Hello, relatives. Welcome back to another episode.
Started there. But just some statistics here. Again, on some reservations, Native American women are murdered at a rate of 10 times that of the national average. That's comes directly from the U.S. Department of Justice. This is in 2016, 5,712. That's the number of known instances of missing and murdered Native American women. Less than 200 of those cases were logged by the Department of Justice. And so there is kind of a disconnect between what's happening in tribal communities and the effort on the part of the federal government to assist tribal people in dealing with this epidemic. And this epidemic just didn't start either yesterday or a year ago or a decade ago. This has been going on since 1492, the killing, the sexual assault of Native American women, the rape of Native American women is something that has a long history in this country. And when I watched that video, it gets me a little emotional because those little girls in that video look like so many of my relatives, look like, you know, I have two daughters, look like my daughters. And, you know, we want our kids to be safe. And to think that you have young ladies, young Indigenous women, you know, 14, 15 years old who are fearful to leave their home is just incredible to me. And there's some cases that really hit home for me that I learned about. And so I try to talk as much as I can about this issue. There's just so much more I could talk about. There really, really is. I have some other statistics here. And I have a list of things you should know. I have 3 additional slides. I don't want to continue to, I guess, lecture any longer. I would like to do a little bit of Q&A and give you guys an opportunity to say a few things. But let me just close with this. I'll close it off and we'll do some Q&A. First of all, thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope that you did learn something from this, and I hope that you take a look at that reflection, that free write, and look at what you wrote. And I hope that there would be, that if you had to write that again, that it would be just a little different, right? You know, we're one of the most misunderstood, one of the most stereotyped groups, and Native Americans today are some of the most marginalized communities. And I really do appreciate you taking the time to learn a little bit about us. I would say that it's very difficult for a lot of Native people, even myself, to enter into Western institutions. And oftentimes when we do, we experience a tremendous amount of racism, a lot of microaggressions. I have a whole list of things I was writing down of things I experienced on campus and issues that my students told me about that they experienced, things that staff had said to them, teachers had said to them, and some of my own experiences with staff and faculty are pretty incredible. Just the racism and the I wouldn't call it discrimination, but the prejudice and the racism that I've experienced. The only thing I would say to that is that sadly, I've been so used to it living here in the United States as an Indigenous person that I'm kind of numb to it. But when I started to look at this list, I started to think, well, this is really incredible. And I wonder, how many other Indigenous people have these same experiences. And talking to other people, our experiences are very, very similar. So we'll go ahead and open it up to Q&A. I don't know, Nylene, do you want to read some of the questions? I really want to get a few questions from our participants.
Sure. We have an anonymous question that is, why is FCC's American Indian student population so low? Is it representative of the demographics in Fresno County?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that a lot of Native American students still to this day don't feel particularly comfortable in Western institutions, including Fresno City College. I think we've done a better job of increasing our Native American student body, but there's more work to be done. I've put together a lot of youth summits just to try to get Native students at a very early age out to Fresno City College. I never stepped on a college campus until I was an adult. And so we worked really hard to get our students out to Fresno City College to say, hey, look, you have a home here. We have people who care about you, who love you, who want to see you succeed. But we also have people here on campus that don't necessarily understand Native Americans, and I think have pushed Native people away. And I think we need to do a better job of reaching out to the Native American community. I think that as a whole, we need to do a lot of reflecting on our treatment of Native Americans, because we're all responsible here. But we've done better, but there's more work to be done, absolutely.
Okay, and back to when you were talking about matrilineal and patrilineal family systems.
Yeah.
Was that true for all the tribes, the matrilineal living post-marriage?
We lost you there for a minute, Bernard. You're muted.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I pay so much for internet too, it's ridiculous. Anyway, it asked the question about matrilineal societies. Can you ask that question again, Nylene?
Yes. Was that true for all of the tribes, the matrilineal living post-marriage?
Yeah, for the overwhelming majority, I would say yes, absolutely. There were many tribes that were patrilineal, but my understanding is that the overwhelming majority, probably around 85% of tribes, were matriarchal and matrilocal. So when you got married, you went to go live with your wife's family.
Okay. How did the change of diet after colonization affect Native American health?
Affected our health immensely. Diabetes, heart disease, obesity, these are all major issues that we're faced with. I have really done a lot of research and done a lot of homework in this area because in my family, diabetes, obesity are really just, they're epidemics. And I worked really hard to decolonize my own diet, getting back to our traditional foods. But when we were forced onto Indian reservations, we were forced to consume foods that did not fit in line with our genetics. And we were not meant to eat bread. I mean, I look at a piece of bread and I gain 5 pounds. We're not meant to eat pasta and butter, and we're lactose intolerant. We're not meant to drink milk. All these foods that we consume, high sugar diets, high fat diets. Well, not necessarily high fat, but certainly high carb diets are just so damaging to our well-being, our physical well-being. I feel like I've done a good job of keeping my weight under control, but it takes a lot of work. And in many Native communities, there's a lot of health issues related to our diets. I mean, it's related to a lot. It's related to our poor diet. It's related to what I would call ethno-stress, racism, and discrimination. Those all lead to high stress lifestyles, the trauma that Native Americans have experienced over 500 years. And then we have these colonial diets that we're forced to adopt. All of that has created all kinds of health issues. So it's not just the foods we eat. It's also the poverty, the racism, right? The trauma.
Okay, and this came up during one of the videos with respect to non-natives can't be arrested on native land.
Yes.
Why haven't we heard about this in the news?
Well, we don't ever hear about anything in regards to Native Americans in the news. I don't know if you recall, but during the election, we were the something else, right? Again, the marginalization of Native Americans throughout history has been so fierce that most people don't know anything about our issues, much less what our rights are. But I will say there's been some changes to the law. And there are some cases now where tribes can pursue prosecution of non-natives if they commit a crime in Indian country. So Native people are really lobbying hard to change these laws, to ensure that they have jurisdiction over what happens in Indian country. So this is changing, but it's not changing quickly enough. And this is why I'm so against any type of stereotypes of Native people, because it really does, it's convenient just to ignore what our real issues are. And this has resulted in an ongoing legacy of violence towards Indigenous people because of the dehumanization, because of the lack of understanding of our rights. Native Americans today should be the wealthiest ethnic group in America, and yet we are the poorest. Our rights have been trampled on since the beginning of European Indigenous relationships, and they continue to be trampled on. But this is probably one of the most important topics that we discuss today in Indian country.
Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of our session. A few people did express thanks to you for coming and talking to us on this topic, and that is a perfect setup to you if you have any classes that you want to plug coming up this fall or even over the summer. I don't know if you're teaching this summer.
No, I'm not. I have moved away from American Indian Studies and more into sociology now, but I do teach American minority groups where I talk about these issues and other racial and ethnic communities as well. What I would say is that we do have a Native American Studies, great Native American Studies program. And Professor Vargas is the lead teacher for right now. And she's outstanding. Whoever they hire for this full-time position, I'm sure will be outstanding. But I'm always open if people ever want to ask any questions about Native Americans or interested in literature and whatnot. Again, I'm going to make this PowerPoint presentation available, and there's a lot of good stuff in there that I didn't present. I wanted to get through as much as possible. I think I got through the the most important stuff, but there's some additional resources that I think you all would find interesting if you wanted to learn more. And I'll make sure that I get that to everybody.
Great, that would be fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for attending. This wraps up our seminar series for this semester. So hopefully we will have a new batch of presenters and topics. If you have any feedback, suggestions, criticisms, constructive or otherwise, please add that to your post-assessment so we can take all that into consideration for next semester's seminars. Again, have a good weekend.
Thank you, Bernard.
Bye.